Hi everyone. If you're new here, I make videos about my experience with long COVID in hopes that something I share can help somebody dealing with similar symptoms. So today I want to talk about three medications that I've tried: midodrine, metoprolol, and propranolol. Midodrine and metoprolol have both helped me, even though they do very different things. Propranolol, which is another beta blocker, made me feel absolutely terrible the one time I took it. I want to talk about why a medication that constricts my blood vessels helps me, while another medication that reduces the effects of adrenaline on my heart also helps me. And I also want to talk about why metoprolol is useful when propranolol, which is also a beta blocker, made me feel like all the energy had been taken out of my body. After autonomic testing at Mayo Clinic and a conversation with my neurologist, I started to understand how they might actually be helping different parts of the same problem. Before I get into that, I do want to say that this is only my experience. I'm not saying that these medications will affect you the same way, and I'm definitely not telling anybody to start, stop, or change a medication. These are prescription medications and they can affect blood pressure and heart rate, so those decisions need to be made with your doctor. One of the biggest things that changed after talking with my neurologist was the way I understood my cold hands and feet. My hands would get extremely cold, especially when I was upright, tired, stressed, or doing something demanding. So I assumed my blood vessels were constricting too much and that the constriction itself was the problem. But my neurologist helped me see another possibility, which was that at least some of the constriction might be from a compensation from my body adapting rather than the original problem. This especially made sense because that specific symptom I didn't get until 3 months into long COVID. So, if the body is having trouble maintaining blood pressure, it can increase sympathetic activity, the fight or flight, and that can redirect circulation away from places like the hands and feet. So, my cold hands could partly show how hard my body was trying to keep me stable, rather than being the original problem. At Mayo Clinic, I had several different types of autonomic testing. My sweat patterns showed reduced autonomic function toward my hands and feet, which supported my doctor's diagnosis of distal small fiber involvement. So, that test did not directly measure the nerves controlling my blood vessels, but my neurologist inferred that if one nerve was affected, then another nerve type could also be as well. So my neurologist combined that result with my symptoms, examination, and cardiovascular testing, and his working diagnosis was a distal small fiber neuropathy triggered by COVID. That basically means an impairment in the signaling that helps control my blood vessel diameter. I also repeated my tilt table test. About 2 years earlier, I had been diagnosed with POTS, but the pattern Mayo saw this time was different. When I was tilted upright, my blood pressure dropped very quickly from around 126 into the 90s, and then it started to recover. My neurologist described that finding as early orthostatic hypotension. Normally, when you stand, autonomic nerves release norepinephrine near the blood vessels. That activates alpha 1 receptors on vascular smooth muscle and helps the vessels constrict so that too much blood does not go downward with gravity. My neurologist thought my peripheral nerves might not be producing an effective response at the blood vessels. So then, if that response is too weak, the rest of my nervous system may have to work harder. That could explain why I can feel completely wired. I have pounding heart, cold hands, and clammy feet. That adrenaline feeling is probably my central nervous system trying to compensate. And although my compensation keeps me afloat, my 24-hour monitor also recorded periods where my blood pressure dropped into the 90s and even the 80s. It was almost like my body was trying to hold my pressure up, but could not always maintain it. My neurologist gave me an analogy that made this easier to picture. I'm paraphrasing this from memory, but imagine that the blood vessels are a horse and the nervous system is the driver. If the signal through the reins is weak, the driver can keep working harder without getting enough of a response. That is similar to increasing sympathetic output, more adrenaline, more norepinephrine, and more effort, while the blood vessels still do not constrict enough. And this is where midodrine started to make much more sense for me. Midodrine is converted into an active medication that stimulates alpha 1 receptors on the vascular smooth muscle. It doesn't repair the nerves or cure the underlying problem, but it can help produce more of the constriction that may be missing. In the analogy, instead of requiring the driver to keep working harder, midodrine helps the horse respond. One thing that surprised me after starting midodrine was that my heart rate would often come down after I took it. At first, that seemed a little strange because midodrine is not mainly considered a heart rate medication, its main effect is on the blood vessels. But if my blood vessels constrict more effectively, my blood pressure and the return of blood toward my heart may be better supported. My central nervous system then does not have to work so hard to maintain my overall vascular tone. So that is also just a normal response called the baroreflex, which just constantly adjusts your heart rate and blood pressure as the blood pressure changes. So when midodrine supports my blood pressure, my heart rate can slow somewhat through that reflex. So for me, that's actually been really helpful, and I've actually needed less metoprolol, which slows down your heart rate on its own. It seems like supporting the vascular side reduces at least some of the reason my heart was being pushed so hard in the first place. Also, although I have felt improvements with midodrine, it doesn't always help me, so it is day to day. Now, metoprolol is a beta blocker that primarily blocks beta 1 receptors in the heart. So, in simple terms, it reduces how strongly the heart responds to adrenaline, lowering its rate and how forcefully it contracts. There can be a downside to that though. Sometimes metoprolol makes me a little more tired, and I have occasionally noticed colder hands and feet after taking it. So if my body is relying on its heart as part of the compensation, reducing that response can sometimes make me feel worse in other ways. But letting my heart pound for hours also has a cost. Sometimes my body just cannot settle down even when I'm lying in bed trying to sleep. So metoprolol is not supporting the vascular side like midodrine. It is controlling one of the effects that the sympathetic activity can have on my heart. This has created a clear difference in how these medications fit into my day. Midodrine is mainly useful for me during the day when I am upright and fighting gravity. I was specifically told not to lie flat for 4 hours after taking it because it can raise blood pressure too much while lying down. At night, I am already horizontal. What I sometimes need is for my heart to stop pounding, and that is where metoprolol has been especially helpful. So, even though these medications can look almost opposite on paper, they're not necessarily fighting against each other. For me, they actually help different parts of the overall problem. And understanding this also changed the way I looked at my experience with propranolol. I only took propranolol once, and I felt extremely weak and exhausted. It really felt like somebody had removed all of the energy from my body. Now, propranolol and metoprolol are both beta blockers, but they are not identical. Metoprolol is relatively selective for beta 1 receptors, especially at lower doses, while propranolol blocks both beta 1 and beta 2 receptors. That means that metoprolol works more effective on just the heart, whereas propranolol can work on the heart, blood vessels, and the lungs. So if my body had two ways to keep me afloat, right, increasing blood pressure and heart rate, and this medication works in the opposite way, that could explain why it made me feel so horrible. That's just my working theory, but I don't know for sure. Propranolol helps many people with dysautonomia. It simply just did not work for me in my situation. I think this is also one reason medication conversations in long COVID and dysautonomia can become so confusing. One person may call a medication life changing, while somebody else says it made them worse. Both can be telling the truth because similar symptoms do not always have the same cause. One person may need more vascular tone and help increasing their blood pressure. Another may need help maintaining blood volume. And somebody else may mainly need help controlling their heart rate because they have an overactive sympathetic drive. More than one of those problems can also exist at once. That is why doctors may consider medications with very different goals, including increasing vascular tone, supporting blood volume, or controlling the heart rate. Somebody else's experience can give you questions to ask, but it cannot predict your response. And whether a medication helps or hurts, that also can't diagnose the cause by itself. If I were starting a new medication now, there are three basic things I would want to understand. First, what part of the problem are we hoping this medication will address? Secondly, what should I pay attention to while I'm taking it? That might be blood pressure, heart rate, dizziness, pounding, fatigue, or something else. And third, what symptoms or measurement would make my doctor want me to call or change the plan? Earlier in my long COVID journey, my symptoms felt completely random. My heart would pound, my hands would become freezing cold, and I would feel weak without understanding how any of it fit together. Over time, testing and conversations with specialists gave me more pieces of the puzzle. I still don't understand everything, but I understand much more than I did 2 years ago. Biggest thing I have learned is that a symptom is not always the original problem. Sometimes it is part of the body's attempt to help you. And that can make seemingly contradictory medications much easier to understand. That is what seems to have happened for me with midodrine and metoprolol. And it may also help explain why propranolol felt so bad for me. If you are still trying to understand your own symptoms, I hope you do not feel like you have to solve everything today. These conditions are pretty complex and frustrating, and sometimes it just takes time and slowly putting the pieces of the puzzle together. I pray that your health continues to improve and that you do not lose hope while you are going through this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.